There are several approaches to testing to help ensure you're creating accessible experiences within your app. And in this episode, we'll be focusing on utilizing automated tests with Espresso and the Accessibility Test Framework. By writing automated tests, you can identify opportunities to improve your app's accessibility during the development process and guard against regressions during future development. To understand how to write automated tests with accessibility checks, you should first be familiar with the Accessibility Test Framework. The Accessibility Test Framework is a library that includes a set of accessibility checks that can be used in automated tests. Let's take a look at an example of how to integrate accessibility checks in an existing Espresso test. Here, we have a simple counter app that displays a number and two buttons to increase or decrease the number shown. To test that the add button works properly, we have an Espresso test that first clicks on the increase button and then checks that the display number has increased by 1. With this existing Espresso test in place, we can integrate accessibility testing frameworks checks to also test for possible accessibility improvements. Accessibility Test Framework is a library that checks specific aspects of an Android UI to identify opportunities for improving an app's accessibility. The Accessibility Test Framework performs the following checks: presence of labels, which allow users of screen readers to understand content within your app; touch target size, because larger touch targets make interaction easier for those with limited manual dexterity; color contrast between text and images, which can impact the legibility of your app's content; and other properties of UI elements to test whether Android's accessibility services can properly convey your app's semantics to end users. Now that you have a better understanding of what the Accessibility Test Framework is and how it works, let's go through the steps to enable accessibility checks in the existing Espresso test. First, you need to add the Espresso accessibility dependency in your build.gradle file. Then, in the existing test class, call accessibilitychecks.enable in the setup method. Now, let's run the test again to see what results are produced. With accessibility checks enabled, there are now 2 accessibility errors reported. The first error is that the add button doesn't have a sufficiently large touch target size. The second error is that the add button doesn't have a label that can be read by a screen reader. You might have noticed that both errors are directed at the add button. This is because by default, accessibility checks are only performed on views that perform a view action. For example, accessibility checks would be skipped for a test that directly invokes a view's perform click method. However, accessibility checks would run in a test that calls perform viewActions.click. To improve on the accessibility checks for this test, you can instead perform checks from a Windows root view. Instead of calling accessibilitychecks.enable, you can call accessibilitychecks.enable and set run checks from root view. This will expand the scope of the accessibility testing by checking the entire view hierarchy of the window that receives the view action, instead of only checking the individual views that receive the view actions. If we fix the previously reported errors and then run the same test again, the result now flags an accessibility error on the text view that displays the number because the text view doesn't have the minimum suggested color contrast between the text and the background. And now you've seen how easy it is to enable accessibility checks on your existing Espresso tests. However, it's important to remember that if tests don't identify any accessibility suggestions, that doesn't necessarily mean the app is accessible. Automated tests should not be taken as a replacement for manual testing. If you want some hands-on practice with integrating accessibility checks with an Espresso test, be sure to check out the Collab linked in the video description below. To summarize, automated tests for accessibility enable you to identify opportunities to improve your app's accessibility during the development process. Accessibility Test Framework is a library that uses a check-based system to assess specific aspects of an Android UI and identify opportunities for improving an app's accessibility. And finally, you can integrate accessibility test framework checks into existing Espresso tests by utilizing accessibilitychecks.enable. Thanks for tuning in to learn more about accessibility testing with Espresso, and be on the lookout for more tips on how to make your apps more accessible.